Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, London Mentor shares his journey from going to a non-target in Italy to breaking into consulting where he worked for over 3 years. Listen how he eventually decided to take on a lot of debt to go to a top MBA program and make a successful transition to investment banking in London at a top bank. Make sure you don't miss how much he had to pay in penalties to his consulting firm for not going back and why it was still an easy choice for him. A really fun chat. Hope you enjoy. London Mentor, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
So it'd be great if you could just start with a short summary of your bio for the listeners.
Absolutely. So I graduated with a bachelor in business administration. I'm Italian of origin, and after that, I decided to do a master in accounting because I thought it would have been a useful foundation, no matter what I would have ended up doing later on. After that, I started my career in consulting because I thought it's a quite broad space where you can start your career in, and you can gain a quite differentiated skill set, but maintaining your perspective still broad. However, as I was working more in a subsector, which was that of the due diligence, I realized that I was interested more in the transaction experience, and therefore I started brainstorming how I could transition to investment banking. As you might know, the transition is very rarely done directly. So I decided to go through an MBA. I went to one of the top 2 MBAs here in Europe, and I managed to successfully transition to IBD in a weird way, if you want, because before I did the traditional internship in one of the top 3 investment banking in the world, and after that I ended in another different firm because they approached me at a later stage. But anyway, the recruiting process was successful, and now I'm at this major firm in the industrial team, been involved since then in public-private transaction, sell side, and a couple of financing. So it's been very easy, a bit very hectic, and
Very hectic,
so far
it's very hectic.
Very hectic, yes.
Yeah.
The couple, let's say the beginning of the year, I've been I noticed a bit of a slowdown, but last year was incredibly hectic. So as I say, in 1 year, I was able to close 3 transactions plus a couple of financings. So that's quite an achievement from my perspective. Yeah. I joined banking with an idea on one hand to possibly stay long term, but on the other also with the insight that having consulting, having banking, I can have a broad profile, and therefore if, for instance, I would like to transition to the buy side, that's also something that is considered valuable. So that's the plan. And
that seems to be a theme of your kind of plan. Like you did the accounting because it gives you the broad base, it's giving you optionality. You seem to place a lot of value in optionality and keeping your.
Yes, I believe it's. Look, as a recent graduate, the most important thing you have to learn are the tools and the mentality, how to approach problem, the basic, Excel, PowerPoint, how to think about, how to structure and be organized. And once you get it from there, there are certain sectors that you can easily sell yourself into, being private equity, being also, corporate development, M&A, if you want to go another way. Optionality for me is important, but another factor that I deem important is, let's call it, having a comprehensive view of the world. So when I was in consulting, it was very important, the commercial aspect, the strategy, and so on. But I was missing the financial analysis, being closer to the market, the transactional aspect. And here I'm gaining that aspect as well, which I believe create a more comprehensive individual. So I see, for instance, nowadays that when I deal with analysts, I have to, they're very, very fast. They're great executors, but sometimes they do miss the big picture.
Yeah.
Whereas where I was in consulting, it was the other way around. Maybe they are too such a brainstormer, but they miss the very important detail, which to them is not obvious. So, having both perspectives, I think, can be quite helpful.
So let's go all the way back to your early days, your undergraduate. So were you thinking, what, you were in school where?
So I was in Turin, which is not traditionally all the people Italian in London are coming from Bocconi. So that's the kind of natural path. My school was quite good on an academic perspective. It wasn't as good as Bocconi on a, let's say, connection to the market, placement, because
not as many
most of the stuff, most of the stuff I had to learn by myself. I came from a family which is, I wouldn't say humble, but none of them is in finance, nor gave me any instruction or the word works. So I ended up knowing about, for instance, McKinsey the last year of my uni. Had never heard before. So it's something
did you know what investment banking was your senior year?
No clue.
So you just the only thing you were introduced to was McKinsey and consulting by the end.
Correct. That's how I ended up to be. It's even more, life is random sometimes. As I say, I wanted to learn stuff by myself. So I traveled a lot. I ended up doing a startup in China. Then I ended up in a bank, but let's say commercial bank in Dublin, in Ireland. And there, my former boss used to be a consultant at the firm that I ended up to in the end. So he kind of recommended me because the work I was doing, he could see that was not that challenging. I was getting bored sometimes. It was more of a asset management of wealthy individuals.
Yeah.
So you realize that probably consulting was something that was more in line with and then I ended up in this way, interviewing and having a job there. So kind of random. And then gradually another piece by working on due diligence, getting in contact with banks, seeing their job made me realize that maybe that was more for me. So it's basically...
You basically didn't know anything going to undergrad. What were you thinking you were going to do? Was it always you knew you were going to go get your master's in accounting anyways, and so you had time to figure it out? Was that the thought? So
actually, the way it works in Europe, but more specifically Southern Europe, so I would say Spain, Italy, France, is that you generally tend to get the bachelor degree and then the master all together.
Yeah,
it's kind of it's a normal path, let's say. Whereas in the UK is not, and of course in US is not as well. So that was, for me, was something that I always considered for granted. And then, as I say, I hadn't exactly a clue. I know that I like numbers. I know that I like some fast-paced environment, but I had no idea what I ended up doing. Starting consulting, sort of like it. Saw the angle of banking and thought I would be liking even more. And so I approached this thing with this in mind, like step by step, basically.
So before we go there, question: is the cost of attending undergraduate school and then masters, is it significantly cheaper than here in the US? I assume.
Yes, it is. It is significantly cheaper, especially if you go what we call like public schools, which has slightly different meaning than what you as people think. It's significantly cheaper. Yes.
Yeah, no, public's cheaper here too, especially if you're in state. If you live in state, but it can still be expensive if you're.
If you go to Bocconi, you still have quite a high fee, but nowhere close to, for instance, my MBA in London, which was comparatively would be also expensive for US standard, I would say, or at least in line. So yeah, that's also part of the reason, probably. And also another reason, which is key, why in Europe we tend to study longer, is that we are less connected to the market, unfortunately, in a way that we don't do much of an internship. Nowadays, it's getting more common, but until a few years ago, it was pretty normal that someone will end up 5 years studying with no internship, or one at max. Now I see like young graduates approaching me for coffee chat and so on, who has already like 10 different internships. Is faster than me in Excel. Has been born exactly know what to do in his life.
They're born out of the womb in Excel, like knowing what VLOOKUPs are. And
exactly. Something which I learned on the job. So that's part of the reason, I will say.
What do you think of that change? Do you think it's a good thing for them to get exposure to the actual careers before they kind of decide, or do you feel like it's too much pressure?
On one end, I think it's useful, definitely, to have someone who guides you in life and give you his perspective so that you can get ahead. On the other, I think it's a bit on a sex sometimes, because it's as if you were born already with someone else giving you the idea that that's the job for you, and all the road lead to that path, but not necessarily. Sometimes it's also better for the personality to explore, to find different ways. And maybe you can say people are afraid to lose 1 year, lose 2 years, whatever, but in a lifetime,
It's
that's pretty
nothing.
irrelevant. It's much more important to explore
Yeah.
and find what is really for you. I've seen so many people, especially nowadays in London, but everywhere. There is so much. This is a slightly different topic, but with a similar result. There is so much focus on diversity, and women are sometimes obliged to. I wouldn't say obliged, but like they're so much spurred into going into investment banking, whereas maybe his or her dream initially was completely different. And then just because it's Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, they feel that they have to accept to go into it. And then after
Because
a few
everyone says,
months,
"How could you turn this down?" Like,
exactly. So they
it's
feel
Goldman.
obliged to accept. And then they realize either they don't like it or it's such a stressful environment that it's not for them. So sometimes the point here being is helpful, but on the other hand, it can be double-edged sword.
Yeah, I always think for my kids, like the delaying, like when I look back at my college, I think to myself, I had no clue what I was doing or where I was going. And when you're
Yeah,
19, 20 years old, how can you know what you want to do?
exactly.
It's super
That's the point.
hard. There's another program, I think it's Northeastern, that actually has these long co-ops, these long internships where during the year you're kind of like taking these, which I think is kind of nice. You still don't, it's still hard to get a true flavor for the job in these internships because
But
at least you get a little flavor. But
yeah.
yeah, hopefully Wall Street Oasis is doing its part to actually get some realistic perspectives profile, because I think it's super important to be able to know what you're stepping into. And I think you're totally right about the year off, like taking a year off just to explore. I think I don't know if it's in Australia, everyone does that. There's like a year
Yeah.
off before they go to school or after they graduate. It's just expected that you're going to travel the world.
Yeah.
And I think
And
that's
somewhere
awesome.
else in the world is considered as you're wasting time. You always need
Yeah.
to be in a rush. You need to be the youngest in your class, the fastest. And in the
Yeah.
long term, that's not a healthy approach.
It's not. And I think the banks are moving away a little bit from being so rigid about what schools they recruit from and I was just talking to a partner today at a private equity fund, a top private equity fund in San Francisco. And he was saying like, it's gotten so crazy with the recruiting and accelerated recruiting and all this, that they're starting to look at like non-traditional candidates. They're starting to look at, because they're hiring people that have no experience guessing just because of the school they went to, and they're hiring people that aren't working out. So anyways, it's interesting that whole thing. So let's go back to your story. Can we call your, for lack of a better term, everyone hates this term, the non-target, can we call your undergrad? It was a
Yes.
good, academically a strong school. You did well. You went to a master's program at a different school. Was there a reason you changed schools?
No, it was actually the same.
Same.
It was
Okay,
the same
just
school.
named differently. Okay, so then you were there in that year in the accounting and finance masters. Is that when you really started looking at more like, okay, you said like, okay, banking's interesting to me potentially, but consulting was really your main focus?
Consulting at that time was my main focus, I would say, mostly because I had no experience of alumni ended up in investment banking at that time. So to be clear, majority of alumni from my school would be, with all the respect, but like KPMG or PwC or retail banks. That's the typical outcome.
Yeah.
So alumni base. So that's why I was not on the radar, nor I had an idea. Also, to be clear, now it's been a bit changed after Brexit, but at that time there were very few investment banks in Milan. Now they're starting a bit to decentralize. We have seen that in Paris, in Frankfurt, and to a less extent
why is
in
that?
Milan as well.
Explain to me, why has Brexit caused more decentralization?
So it has caused more centralization because, for a passporting reason in Europe, there is a directive which say that you need to have a certain presence in the country where you're operating, where you're doing deals. And before it was not an issue because it was all Europe, but now that it's not Europe anymore. They are what I've seen
They're
more
setting up
than
little satellite offices.
exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. What I've seen more than bringing people from London away, they are hiring more people there than here. Maybe freezing the hirings here, but the new hiring, if you know that, if for instance, if you are German speaker, immediately you get transition to move to Frankfurt without question.
Do you feel like after a few years of London, that might be a really nice way to get back home to Italy?
Probably yes, because I do like London on some perspectives, such a fast movie city, but on the other, like the weather is killing me, honestly.
Yeah, I know, it's brutal. It's like Boston.
It's quite brutal. Yeah. It is. It's always great. It's always great. That's what kills me. So yeah, that would be a good way.
To California, it's always sunny here.
Yeah, that would be.
We have fires though.
The transfer.
We have a fire problem out here. It's freaky. But anyways, okay, so you're there. You're kind of, tell me about the whole interview process. Is it the typical case interview structure? You start practicing with your colleagues. How did you get into line for consulting?
Sure. So as I say, my former boss in this bank at Dublin forwarded my CV, and all of a sudden I started asking myself, okay, what is it actually strategic consulting? Googling into internet, ended up with all those Victor Chang frameworks and Cosentino and so on. So a lot of preparation by myself initially. I'm quite structured, so even if I didn't have a clue, I divided by topic, trying to keep it on track every day, and then after a while, starting to practicing with friends, which I knew in two other way outside school or randomly online doing cases, and that's how I ended up in consulting. And as I say, I did like the job on some perspective. Consulting is such a broad word that sometimes it can be, very boring stuff as a project management.
Tell me, what were you doing? Were you had certain clients, you're flying out to the client every week?
Yes. So the job is quite different. That could be interesting to compare the two, but let's say one of the major difference the work in terms of where you perform it. So you're typically from Monday until Thursday at the client space, sometimes even on Friday. Which means at the beginning it seems so cool that you're traveling, but you're not really traveling, right? To be clear. Just to give you an example, I had a project for 6 months. This was a post-merger integration of two large companies getting together in Prague. Like the integration was in Czech Republic. It means that every Monday I would wake up at 4 a.m., getting on a plane at around 7 and be there at 10 or 11, and then the Friday back home at 11, 12 for 6 months this way.
Gosh. 11, 12
and then to be clear, it was not Prague
noon?
City.
Meaning you had at least Friday afternoon off, or you were still doing work?
No. In that case, it was the whole week. So it was actually PM, night.
That's horrible. That's a horrible.
And to be clear, yes, it was. And to be clear, it was not even Prague, like center. It was in this industrial plant outside.
You couldn't even go like clubbing in Prague or enjoy it?
I couldn't go. I could go some days where maybe it was a bit quieter, but on an average week, no. And also, I had to eat. Can you imagine this? Can you figure out the moment where you have to have lunch? There's nothing nearby you. The only place is the canteen of industrial work, and in Prague, that typically they eat very, very greasy stuff. So that was my entire 6 months.
What's the canteen? What's the canteen? What is that?
The canteen is like where you get
bar.
It's like a restaurant, but paid by the firm.
Oh, okay.
And they typically
like the
have
this
or
whatever.
Yeah, it's a full restaurant, we'll define, but with very limited choice. Yeah. And you typically have those porks and quite heavy food. So it's difficult to work after that. So that was one of the.
So how much weight did you gain in those 6 months? Be honest.
Quite a lot. I don't recall exactly, but I remember the next project I would go running every morning. I would wake up myself early in the morning just to get away with those.
So you're in this, it gives people a good perspective of like, it's not so glamorous. You're waking up early, having to fly to Prague, but you're not really in Prague. You're in the outskirts of industrial Prague.
Yeah.
Did you get to tour it at all? I know I was interested to move to Prague actually after I lived in Buenos Aires for a year. I was going to go move there next and tour all of Europe through there, but it never happened because I met my wife in Boston. So then that was it.
Oh, wow.
So tell me, did I miss out? Is Prague incredible? I'm going to visit there.
Prague is a quite nice city, especially you're a single guy. I mean, a couple of times I stayed there for the weekend. I was single at that time. I'm not anymore. And it was fun. Honestly,
you had a lot of
really
fun.
Yes, it's really fun. Like girls are quite open-minded and the vibe is good.
Nice. So, okay. So you're basically going back and forth. You get off that one, you go into another plan, but you're a consultant for how many years then?
I was doing consulting for slightly less than 4 years. So 3.5 years, let's say.
Yep. So what made you think MBA? Like what got that into your head, investment banking? What eventually?
So at some point I was working more and more on due diligence. So I supported CVC and the likes. Mm-hmm. And on one hand, I was loving when we were giving our perspective on the market, the competitor, and so on. But I felt I was always missing, what is this word for? What is the, like, as if we were cut off at some point. We couldn't see the entire process, the entire picture. And I was fascinated by these bankers preparing preparing their modeling, that we were having some section in common, but overall, we couldn't see the entire thing. Mm-hmm. And so at that point in time, I say, what is the best way? I had a chat with someone at Morgan Stanley at that time, asking about how could I do the transition. And he told me that it was quite difficult. This guy was from the Milan office. He told me it's quite difficult. Our office is small. And traditionally also, we don't hire directly consultants, but I know that someone made it through an MBA. Why don't you try that path? And that's what I did. In the choice of MBA, I wanted to stay long-term in Europe, mostly because I like living here, let's say. Mm-hmm. And within Europe, there are only two MBA I believe you can consider if you want to go to a top bank after that.
Yeah, now you're at a top bulge bracket bank.
Yes, so yeah, I consider INSEAD and LBS, which are both great schools.
Yep. So, okay, tell me a little bit about, so you knew this going into your MBA, you knew that you actually wanted to go into banking. So you were dead set on that recruiting path. Did you do any specific legwork prior? So you obviously have to do the applications, which is a pain, and you have to write all the essays and would you take the GMAT for those?
Yes, absolutely. And that was a pain because I was, as I told you, last period of consulting was all due diligence. So still not as hard as banking, but quite hard.
Still 70 plus hours, right? 70 plus.
Yeah, hours. I will say average 70 when it was a hard week, maybe 80.
How about pay? Can you tell me a range of what you started at and what you progressed up over the years?
So yeah, sure. This is, you might be consider that this is all like Italy salary. So you need to adjust for the cost of living. Okay. But I started as a base 35. Mm-hmm. With bonus. Bonus in consulting is not huge. This across Europe, so it's around 30%. Mm-hmm. And then when after the third year, that will has increased quite a lot because it was 70 with bonus still as 30%.
Almost double. You almost doubled.
Yeah. Because I was quite I was on a fast track. So basically every year I was promoted ahead because the last term would be 2 years. So it was quite a good career.
Were they upset that you left or said you were going to leave?
Yes, they quite. Actually, that was the tricky part. I left being a sponsor consultant because at that time, again, going back to where I come from, I didn't have the money to fund my MBA, nor a bank would loan me out all that money. Because living in, I ended up, I didn't mention before, but I ended up at LBS, and living in London is extremely expensive, plus the cost of the master. So all in all, you're looking to fund yourself with 200K or so. And it's not that, I mean, I could have saved that. And banks in Italy are quite traditional. So just to explain the concept of an MBA and putting money in there while you have a good salary is something that they look at you, you're crazy, like you earn such a good salary, why you will go and spend all this money back to school, not having the salary cost opportunity for 2 years and so on. So I was only marginally able to finance that for a loan. And then I took the sponsorship from my previous firm in consulting, with, of course, the caveat that I would have had to return that with a penalty if I had left after the 2 years.
What's the penalty, 10%?
No, the penalty is quite huge, since they are used to people doing so for different reasons, being private equity, being banking.
Oh, they're used to people like not coming back. There's a huge.
There is a share, I would say 50% of the people from consulting going into MBA who either decide to go for a easier life, I mean like Facebook, Amazon and the like. Or even play harder and goes, I would say, reducing share, but there is still a share of people going to banking or directly into P. So they are used to lose a significant share of those people.
So they start. Like, you give me a sense of what they're lending you, like what this consulting firm was lending you.
So
like
they were
50,000 euros or
they were telling me 70K.
70,000 euros.
Yes, and I had to pay back 100.
Oh,
yes.
So
plus the additional loan plus. So let me give you this perspective.
Yeah, give me the full numbers, because that's like a 40%.
Yes.
Penalty?
Correct. Which is almost illegal.
Is that legal? Yeah, I was going to say.
You know what?
Can't you?
You know what?
And just pay them.
You sign a contract with them saying, I recognize the below, and here.
Okay, but wait. This is the only way you could have financed your.
Exactly. I was aware that it was kind of financially nonsense.
This is like a black market of financing MBAs. That's crazy. I've never heard of that.
That's the way it works.
They're charging you like a 40% interest rate.
That's why all the people that don't get an exceptional offer in the end go back to consulting, because they cannot afford. They have also a significant retention program beyond what I just mentioned, that if you go back, they give you relatively small, but not so small, like 20K signing.
Yeah.
So basically, if you leave, you lose the 70 that they loan you. So it's kind of fair return money, plus the 30, plus the 20 that you don't get because you're going back. Additionally to that, I tell you more. There is a law, given that Italy is losing significant brain to US, UK, and so on. The government implemented basically tax-free for the 75% of the salary is completely debt tax. So if I had go back, I would have had 90K plus 30% of bonus, 75% tax-free, not a loan, and a signing bonus.
So it's really like 100. It's really like 150 to 170K euros.
Yeah.
If you had gone back versus.
So that's the level of craziness in accepting this choice.
Now tell me about. So I get it, but you're looking long term, and you're saying, I've already made the investment in school. I want to be, working on something different, like you said, understand the financial modeling. It makes you more well-rounded. It makes you more for your whole career. And so you're investing in your career is how you can think of it, even though it was very enticing to take the money, I'm sure. So, but tell me a little bit about just how you saw that math. So like when now you're accepting at a bulge bracket associate, what are they paying you? I know it's in the database, but just.
So let me give you the full picture. I worked during my MBA. I've done 2 internships, one in the other major bank, which pays relatively well for an internship. We're talking about 12 weeks. I think it's around 20K or so.
You're talking euros.
Slightly less. This is in pound. Slightly less than 20K, like 18, 19.
Yeah.
Then I've done another internship in a mid-cap private equity, 1 billion fund, which paid similarly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up, so those money I contribute towards the repayments of the loan and the living cost of MBA. And then I started the year back approximately a year ago. The starting salary is 91K in pounds, yeah. There is a signing bonus, which is between a relocation, and it gets you to 30K pounds again.
Yep.
And then the variable it's around, it depends on your performance, but it's around 80% of your salary, I would say 80 plus. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're still doing better.
You're still doing better. And the perspective is
Not in year one, but after, say, what's the
yeah,
payback? When's
exactly.
the break even? Like 2.5 years?
That's correct. Yes. And also I was able to, okay, this is advanced finance, personal finance, but I was able to refinance that loan through peer, basically loaning me out money at their interest rate. Because when I did the loan was like 3 years ago. So interest rate was completely different than the macro environment that we are experiencing right now, right?
Yeah.
So I was paying 5 plus Euribor. Now I'm playing with
LIBOR
this.
plus 5?
Yes.
Oh, that's high. Yeah, that's high.
It was a personal loan with no guarantor, nor.
Yeah.
Now I'm paying like 2.5.
LIBOR plus 2.5 or 2.5 flat?
2.5 flat.
Oh, it's amazing.
So it's quite a good rate. So yeah, that's the whole story. And then I'm doing daily trading on pounds versus euro because we have a huge volatility since the Brexit, the coronavirus, and so on. So there are plenty of opportunities to.
Tell me a little bit about, so you're doing a little day trading on the side on top of your.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really. I would say I am just exposed to pounds and euro, and when one is favorable, I exchange one way or the other. I would say that way rather than say I'm a trader.
Got it. Fair. Okay, so you're just having a little bit of FX arbitrage there for yourself.
Correct.
Because you have debt denominated in one and not the other, or whatever.
Correct.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about. What's it like in terms of, was the expectation coming out of business school that the hours are going to be longer? Has that been what you've expected? And then tell me a little bit about just having to manage. I assume you're managing now analysts, whereas as a consultant, maybe you didn't. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So you're touching two great points. First one, they always tell you that it's terrible. It's worse. I mean, one bank.
Are you not sleeping?
So as I say, the start of the new year has been slightly better, but the first 6-7 months were terrible, like literally terrible. So I'm in a bank which were renewed to be one of the most workaholic, and within that bank, I mean the team that together. So there are two teams that are renewed to be long hours. One is FIG, the other one is industrial. I'm in industrial, so it was quite heavy. And when I say heavy, especially at the beginning, because there are multiple new factors coming in. So on one hand, it's a new environment, it's new tool, it's new job. You have analysts to manage that most of the time are more knowledgeable than you, at least on an execution perspective, and they're faster in Excel. That's for sure. Yeah. I used to be one of the nerdy in consulting, doing macros and stuff, but still here I would say I'm definitely not the fastest. I'm probably in the medium, or even less, slightly less.
For associates,
so that's,
for associates.
For associate grown up in banking.
Yeah, and yes. you're slow compared to the analysts because they've been there for 2 or 3 years and they're
absolutely. Yeah. And something that you lose, right? Even if you stop for because in consulting it was more on the client. After staying there 3 years now, it was more on the client facing, starting to present your work and so on. As an associate, you still have to do a lot of grant work or review grant work of people. So that's a key factor. And coming from an MBA, I would say, of course, you need to be super humble to show that you put in the same hour as the analysts do, but also on the other hand, being able to bring something to the table. Because if you're just behaving as an analyst who's learning, senior will look at you like in a disrespectful way. So you need to be fast to close the gap on one end, but on the other, try to bring in your qualities from the MBA. So maybe understand more the priorities, being able to manage upwards, communicate clearly, and being a bit more leading the process side of it, handling the client and so on. So that's the two advice I would give to MBA going into.
So you're working. So you're working literally 90 plus hours pretty consistently.
Yes, I would say so. The killer for me has been the weekend. So my firm has implemented one of the many rules where
Yeah, like
you
protected Saturday or
exactly
down,
but
the
that
Bank of
the
America,
other
there's all the bulge brackets. Yeah.
exactly the other face of the of the coin is that if you have one protected day, then the next is considered completely like 9 a.m. in the office or 10 a.m. in the office
And
until
it's
2 or
never
3.
off.
It's all like every day, every Sunday, it's a work day. Then you can sometimes be flexible, whether it's working from home 4 or 5 hours or it's full day in the office. That it varies, but on average, always working day. And so that's what you
How are you
keep.
holding up? I know it's really tough. How are you holding up mentally?
Mentally fine, because as I'm saying, I'm quite strong as a personality, but when you're at a different stage in life, so I'm older than a traditional associate, having done through consulting and MBA, and you start having a long-term partner. Thanks God I don't have kids, but at some point they will come, and that's the tricky part, because if you have one
Are you
day
married?
off.
Are you married?
I'm not married, but I'm in a long-term relationship. At some point, it's on the plate once I've paid all my debt. And so yeah, once you have one day a week for yourself, and that day most likely you're tired, you're stressed, you're still on mentally, because there's the call tomorrow, there's the deck to be sent out. It's quite difficult to manage. That improves with time, yes and no. I see my senior they're still, of course, they're not gonna work on an Excel at 3 a.m., but they're still exhausted by traveling. They're still doing call at midnight. So that's something that made me reflect at some point. I like the job, but it's something that I don't believe is sustainable long term if you want to have anything else outside your work.
Mm-hmm. And so what are you thinking? I think, you said your long-term relationship. I hope your partner is actually very understanding of your schedule, because that's
Yeah, she is.
crucial.
Thanks, all she is.
If she's not, it's kind of
I,
make things
to
even
give
harder.
to give you a fun fact, she's doing something completely different. She's a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and we start dating during the MBA actually, and I was doing my internship in a private equity, which was a mid cap, so lifestyle was quite relaxed for a consultant or banking perspective. So I ended up like a 9 or so. And she was like at the very beginning, why are you staying so late in the office? What's going on? And I was supposed to start in IBD a few months later. I say, oh my God, this is going to be hard.
Yeah. So did you warn her? Did you give her lots of warnings?
I gave her a lot of warnings. And what helps is that a lot of people out of the MBA, which are my friend, her friends, are in a similar condition. So it becomes kind of new normality around you. But the suggestion there is to involve your partner in everything. Of course, you don't have time anymore to split friends, partner, family. So you need to be able to manage everything at the same time in your small free time.
So tell me, it's like you said, you're not sure long term. What's your thought? I know you said potentially you see yourself as being fairly flexible in terms of private equity. I think personally, I've heard of the almost 100 guests I've had on this podcast, I've only interviewed 2 that have made the IB associate to private equity jump. It's incredibly difficult, but possible.
Okay.
But possible. And it's all about who you know, just as it always is, right? So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. If that's what you want, it's doable. But
yeah, I would say I don't know whether the associate you mentioned was from US or Europe. In Europe,
it's more common in Europe, you're saying.
I wouldn't say it's common. I would say it's feasible. I've heard cases. It's again. So I had a few conversations with the Dante because they always reach out. First of all, it depends on what you want. If you want mid-market, it's quite feasible. If you want large cap, it's harder because the traditional path they call analysts after, it used to be 3 years, now 2, 1. So it's getting earlier and earlier because they want to get hold of the talents very soon, and also because they can pay less. But it's feasible. You need to demonstrate, again, you need to go back to the ladder in a way that you, after being, I didn't mention before, but I would have gone back to consulting as a project manager because I was already, I had the post-MBA position before the MBA, so they would have hired me back as a project manager. And then here, in the bank as an associate, second year associate, but still associate. And then if I would have to make a move as a big fund where it was possible, I would end up again as an associate, which is the last in the ladder. So it's also something that it must be reciprocal. So the fund must be willing to accept that, but it's also new. And then beside that is the usual hyper competitive space and compete with the 100 for one or two positions. So that's
Right.
I'm well aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in terms of I wanted to ask you about cultural things. So like you're from Italy, you're working in London. What's it like in the office? Is there any sort of cultural things that are awkward or things that are different? Maybe not awkward, but just tell me about that.
Yeah, I would just say for sure there's quite a big difference. So London is great because it's a melting pot. So you have people from literally everywhere.
Yeah, like New York.
Definitely the British are minority. So we're saying like 10% or so in my team, for instance. There's a huge community of Italians for the reason I mentioned before. But I would say more than London versus Italy, which of course has some different, but the most striking one is definitely consulting versus banking. Both people are extremely smart. Generally, it goes maybe because of the nature of the job. Banking people, I found it a bit less interesting as a well-rounded individual. Simply because maybe they were interested in the first place, but simply because they don't have time to do, I don't know, in consulting, you find a lot of people doing startups, doing volunteering, doing whatever they like. Here, it's so hard to have a consistent routine and habit and hobby, whatever it's something that you can't say I have really an hobby that I maintain every week X hours.
Right.
If you have someone else like family or one or the other, that's the point.
Yeah.
So that's one different. Another different is that there's less team working in a way. There's a lot of individual work. There is still team working, but it's more like we split the task, a review.
Yeah.
Then like you
go off into your silo and you do your work, you come back and like that.
Exactly. Which on some stuff can also be very efficient, right? Because when I want to focus on something that needs to be get done quickly, is better than being a table with 5-6 people.
Yeah.
But on the other, it has its cons, let's say. No. Overall, the culture is not. I wouldn't say the culture is bad. For sure, is not as I used to read and hear on the web. There's not that hierarchy, deep hierarchy level, but of course people
there's not just. Sorry, I didn't understand that.
There's not very hierarchical culture.
You got it. Okay.
Just people work more. That's the way, and of course it become more stressful because of that. I've seen a few cases of.
Do you feel like the debt has forced you to stay a little bit longer? Or do you feel like, I guess now that you're out and you have this job, like you said, there's options for you. So even if you were to take a pay cut and would make 120 pounds instead of 200, you're still fine, right?
No, definitely. So definitely. That is something that, can you hear me, Patrick?
Yeah, I hear you. Great. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Hello? I think I lost you.
No, I'm here. I can hear you. I'm here.
I think I lost you for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. So I heard everything. Yeah. I was just saying that you could take a pay cut, right? And you theoretically, you still be fine with your interest payments.
Yes, that's a fair point. Let's say money has not been, aside from this move where I had to consider it, has not been a major motivator in a way, as you say, where once you earn more than 100K plus, not really making the marginal difference, right? So it's just a matter of finding the space you want to be in, something that you see yourself, because the next move is probably the final one. Let's call it this way. There's never a final in life, but it's something that I want to be sure is the space that is where I would like to grow.
Have you started actually thinking about that? Have you actually started thinking, okay, I know you touched on the options, but do you want to for the listeners' benefit, how are you thinking about those next options? Because you're how do you even have time to think? You're working 90 plus hours a week, managing, like it's tough. And there's a lot of pressure on you. You have pressure from your
Mhm.
significant other saying, well, you don't spend any time with me. I'm sure it's just, like, give me
Mhm.
that time.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
we
that's
have to go back in. You have the pressure from, you have the debt still, a large principal balance. So tell me
so.
what's factoring
gi-
into all your decisions.
So given this, will stay anonymous, I can be more open about it.
Yeah.
I clearly like the P space, and part of this move was to justify a further step.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I think about it is, I basically have two options. One option is go with the standard recruiting, large cap that they do every year or so, compete with someone junior associate, analyst, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Likelihood very low, but still, I would have a hedge in funds such as, I don't know, the typical bank capital and so on, where they like more consultants, so I can play
That angle. Yeah.
that angle.
Mm-hmm.
Or the easier route of going to a mid-market. I had an experience there. Is actually fun. I think it's quite a different job.
Mm-hmm.
In a way. You're not in a big fund. Again, you are a number. You're executor of a small piece. In a mid cap, you can interact with management more. You're definitely more exposed to the entire process. You're leading a bit more. So those were the consideration. Then I came to the conclusion that I will go for the first way. Reason being, if I want to be an investor long term, I'd rather start for a place where I'm exposed to typically the best management team, the best people out of the industry, or different industries. So as a starting point, I think looking for the large cap space. And again, we can have this conversation later on, but I'm having quite a good traction. I'm with different rounds, final rounds with big funds. So there is that space open. It's just that you have to fight a lot, and it's very, very competitive. So we'll have a conversation later on, and maybe we can, once this is gone through. But those are the options that I had thought about.
Yeah, I think it's a very good perspective. I think the middle market, especially middle market, once you start a family.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it tends to be a little bit more sleepy, a little bit more like, as long as you're getting your work done,
Yes, it's generally more flexible. It's still hard under a deal, but you generally do, let's be honest, one deal per year. You might bid for more for sure, but what I want to say is that a lot of the time you will spend on prospect, on going to conference to meet expert, on sourcing, and during those time you can have more a normal lifestyle. So that's something that young people again don't take into consideration, but once you get farther in your career, you understand how important it is to have a balance at some point.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about any concern over how much dry powder, how much liquidity there is out there. Not liquidity, dry powder basically to put to work in these vintage funds. I mean, maybe now you're coming at the right time. If the market melts down, there'll be some good buying opportunities.
That's a great. So it's something that you can't control, right? So if you want to go into that space, you should go, and then you face the consequences. But you're right, probably, unless there is a significant meltdown, and then typically the vintage perform. If we look at the 2008 vintage, was a good one, but because the multiple nowadays. So two factors, namely, one, multiple nowadays are insane. They came down a bit with the coronavirus, but in general, it's not sustainable. Second factor, financing is so easy and with no costs available to everyone. And maybe there's a third that goes as a consequence, which you mentioned, is the dry powder. So funds push more and more to invest in assets that probably they wouldn't have paid that much, but they need the LP are pressuring them. I gave you the money. I know that you're considerate, but I gave you the money to invest them, right? So at some point you need to deploy that capital. So
that's why I've heard a lot of people, I feel like, coming out of MBAs going to do their own search fund to go really lower middle market, buy a company for 2 to 5 million. and try to get the returns themselves rather than and have much more of an impact operationally versus trying to go to a mega fund banking 2.0, working the long hours, potentially get no carry, or the carry becomes not even worth very much. But your timing could be perfect. Actually,
let's see how it plays out.
Yeah, as everything dries up on the sell side for deals, you jump to the buy side where there's a lot of buying opportunities.
Let's look at it in this way. Yeah.
Um,
but definitely it's a concern. Like it's not something we can neglect.
Yeah.
And probably I believe there will be some concern because nowadays everyone is investing. We see hedge funds moving into PE. We see large cap going into small cap and the other way around. So there's so much capital.
Everyone's going everywhere.
There will be some consolidation at some point, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can be a winner in this market.
Yeah. Well, except the entrepreneurs starting the businesses. So hopefully I've had people come ask about Wall Street Oasis that are way too big for us. They're like, our minimum check is 20 million. I'm like, you guys, we're tiny.
Wow.
There's no way. Like if they're emailing me, they're searching through every little last nook and cranny for any potential place to put money.
Another winner.
I wish we were a little bit bigger and I could get some insane valuation and
next cycle.
Exactly.
Another big winners are management team who like sponsor driven assets. I've recently sold a business in business service space where the CEO was at the second cycle of PE ownership. And he had something like
a management buyout, like where they put in, or they just have a significant interest.
So they had basically sweet equity, plus a little bit of their own equity, because it was part of the funding family.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't imagine now this company is not that big. We're talking about 620 of EV, so it's not that big. And they were getting like just in this cycle, beside their normal remuneration, their bonus, we're talking about 30-40 million of sweet equity. So they are quite a winner if they're able to do a couple of cycle with PEs like that. I would go to an island and probably do this podcast all day long.
No, you'd be bored after a while. You'd go back. You may not do banking, but you'd go back and do something.
Probably.
So anything else before we call it? Anything else you want to share with the listeners or advice you'd give to your younger self or kind of people looking to kind of follow in your footsteps?
I would say maybe if you're approaching, no matter whether it's PE, whether it's banking, consulting, I would say that typically you tend to have 3 areas where you are assessed, right? So you have on one hand the technical. And so, for instance, in banking, you have to prepare all your guides around there. You need to really understand the concept more than memorizing the definition, the way to assess a company, but doing a bit more your own work to understand really what you're talking about. But that area is sometimes overstated by people. People tend to over-prepare or do all the possible modeling, but in the end, I've done a lot of interview, ended up with few offers. So I would say it's not the hardest part. It's something that you need to master, of course.
Yeah.
But most likely, the majority of people who will be interviewing a top firm will be very fluent on those technical questions. So it's not an area that you can strongly differentiate yourself. And then there is the second and third areas which people are sometimes neglecting. So one I will define fit or behavioral, where it's not just about the personality fit, but it's try to understand those soft skills by really nailing down on question around what you've done in the past, your CV, and so on. And in the end, in those 30 minutes, 1 hour conversation, that's an important part. The person needs to like you, right? You need to answer right, but they need to like you. And then the third area is probably the, I would call market knowledge. So knowing exactly about the firm you're interviewing, knowing the transaction, knowing the market, being able to have a conversation about the dry power and so on. And that comes it's not something you can prepare in 2 weeks. You need to start reading newspaper, guides, talking to professionals in the industry. significant ahead of time and form your own view about the market, about the macroeconomic environment, and so on.
Yeah.
So if I can give an advice, the last two sections are at least as important, if not the first one. And people tend to always spend more time on the first.
Oh yeah, everyone's panicked about the technicals, and then they think they have a very good answer to why investment banking or or the market,
Exactly.
and they actually don't realize that their answer is very mediocre to poor.
Yeah,
very cookie cutter, and it's not genuine, and it's
by they learn by heart all the definition on
they
both
memorize.
investment banking, and that's it. No, it's not the way it works.
Yeah, and even our courses, we give sample answers, and I sometimes struggle to think, is that really the best way to go? I almost feel like this
you need to put
makes me
framework
think,
at some point, right?
I feel like maybe even doing this made me think, just having this conversation, of actually having an audio of what a good answer sounds like, because it's not just what you say, it's really the delivery on how you say it that can make
How you say it.
a massive difference on the impression and on how genuine it sounds, and how.
No, definitely. Just the same way as you explain you can explain a technical concept in a very structured way, or in a completely messy way, and saying this exactly same things, but the outcome will be completely different. So that's a fair point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anyways, well, thank you so much, London Mentor, for making this appearance. And
pleasure.
We'll definitely probably have you back on at some point, maybe in a few years, once you've made some transitions. And
absolutely, let's keep in touch. And thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Bye.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.